England, and indeed the rest of the United Kingdom, now has a new monarch, a new Prime Minister, and a new loaf of sterling. Of the pound variety, that is. Raheem is doing just fine. But in this landscape of radical change, there is one constant. The nation's rock, if you like. A steel beam still doing his best to hold the country up, whilst all around him crumbles. Though not everyone is as ecstatic or as gushing as I am about the continued presence of Gareth Southgate. In all seriousness, I may well be the only person left in England who still has any sympathy for Gareth Southgate. It is not that I don't have any complaints about his tactics, team selection or man management, or that I believe that he is perfect. Clearly he isn't. But I do feel as though a lot of people simplify some of the dilemmas that he is grappling with as England boss, and are, at times therefore, guilty of misrepresenting them. The fact also remains that, in his only 2 major tournaments in charge of England, Southgate has taken the Three Lions to their first semi-final in more than 20 years, and then their first final in more than 50 years. You can say what you like about Gareth Southgate, that he is too cautious, that he is uninspiring, and that yes, he still hasn't won anything. And we will get to all of that. But those are the indisputable facts, and they are the reason why, short of getting caught up in a Big Sam-style scandal or getting spotted taking a massive dump pitchside during the minute silence of the Queen and then proceeding to wipe his arse with a St George's or Union flag, he was always going to be England's manager at the 2022 FIFA World Cup. Yes, even in spite of relegation from the top flight of the UEFA Nations League. But by the same token, having inherited the worst England squad in at least 20 years back in 2016, fresh off the back of the Iceland and Allardyce debacles, and having gone into the 2018 World Cup with the lowest expectations of any England squad heading into a World Cup, Gareth Southgate does now have lots of very talented players, particularly in attacking areas. They have just had a rotten Nations League campaign, and questions are quite reasonably being asked of Southgate, England's form, and their prospects at the upcoming World Cup. One of those questions, which is an eternal question for every national team, surrounds what is in fact Gareth Southgate's, or indeed, just England's best team. So that is the subject of today's video, and we will see if we can't answer some of those other questions about Southgate and England en route. Goalkeeper, Jordan Pickford. It doesn't get much easier than in goal, where Nick Pope and Aaron Ramsdale's wobbly recent introductions have only served to further cement Jordan Pickford's undisputed crown as England number 1. There have always been questions asked of Jordan Pickford in an England shirt, and now on 45 caps, and having been England's number 1 at 2 major tournaments, he has thus far been able to come up with all of the answers. Every time the likes of Ramsdale, Pope, and even Dean Henderson hit any kind of form, immediately some people start to call for them to start ahead of Pickford, particularly when the Sunderland native was suffering from some pretty patchy form at Everton a couple of seasons ago. For the last 18 months though, for both Everton and England, Pickford has been outstanding, receiving nowhere near the credit that he so richly deserves. It frustrates me, and therefore I must imagine him as well, that the narrative around Pickford always seems to come back to those 5 words. He's never let England down. On the face of it, it's a compliment, and everyone who says it, myself included in the past, intends it as a compliment. But it frames Pickford's performances in an England shirt all wrong. The Toffees stopper hasn't just not let England down, he has routinely been outstanding. And he was among the best keepers at both the 2018 World Cup and Euro 2020. He's a popular character, he is the angriest man alive even when he has just made a save, and his distribution is streets ahead of his closest competitor for that number 1 spot. I am referring there to Nick Pope, who is arguably England's best shot stopper, but has never been the best with the ball at his feet, and looked terrified against Italy and Germany when he was asked to play the ball out from the back. For that reason, I would actually have Aaron Ramsdale as Pickford's deputy for England, should Pickford be forced to miss the tournament for any reason. Defence: Reece James, Kyle Walker, Eric Dyer, John Stones, and Ben Chilwell. Far more contentious than who starts between the sticks, England's backline is far from settled heading into the 2022 World Cup. And the first question is whether you go with a back four or a back five. Southgate has routinely been accused of being too conservative when he has gone with a back five, which is really more of a three when in possession of the ball, but often when he has switched to a four, England have looked far too open and vulnerable, which has also prompted criticism. Given that the Italy and Germany games were England's last, before kicking off their World Cup campaign against Iran in 7 or 8 weeks' time, I think that the system and personnel that Southgate picked is likely to be very similar to the one that he goes with in Qatar, with the addition of those who missed out through injury, of course. That means a back five is practically guaranteed, I would imagine, and I think that five will most likely read Reece James, Kyle Walker, John Stones, Harry Maguire, and Luke Shaw. Maybe we might see Walker on the right and Dyer coming in for James, or a straight swap with Dyer in for Maguire, and possibly even Chilwell ahead of Shaw. The one player that I haven't mentioned there is Fikayo Tomori, simply because he didn't feature in what were effectively World Cup warm-up games for England, at his home ground against players that he is familiar with against Italy, and then he failed to even make the squad for that Germany game. I think that it is extremely improbable, therefore, barring some kind of injury crisis there, that Tomori starts for England at the World Cup. Personally, I do think Tomori is probably England's second best centre-back, but having won just 3 caps, and only one in 2022, whilst I would have given him more minutes in recent internationals, even I wouldn't now throw him straight into my starting 11 at the World Cup, hence why he doesn't make my best 11 for the tournament. Arguably, England's backline isn't strong enough to accommodate a back four at the World Cup. England had a good defensive record with a 4 at Euro 2020, but that was in large part due to the excellent form of Harry Maguire and Luke Shaw. Gareth Southgate will be hoping that both players will be able to replicate that kind of form in Qatar, but the fact that both have been dropped by Manchester United, and Maguire is currently enduring his toughest spell of form in an England shirt, means that most assuredly is not guaranteed. Ben Chilwell, similarly, off the back of a long-term spell on the sidelines, and Chelsea signing Marc Cucurella hasn't earned consistent minutes at Chelsea this season, and the left-back or left-wing-back position continues to be a real thorn in England's side. I think Reece James is probably just about England's best option at right-wing-back, currently in outstanding form for Chelsea, and since he started there in both Nations League games, I would be surprised if Gareth Southgate didn't agree. Walker at centre-back is always a difficult one, and it is one that I objected to at the 2018 World Cup, where he gave away a penalty in England's opening game against Tunisia, if I remember right, which thankfully didn't hurt England, who came back to win 2-1, and was then also caught napping, I think. Perhaps I am being a bit harsh here, but I think so anyway, for Mario Mandzukic's winner against England in the World Cup semi-final. I think that he has become a lot more defensively astute since then, a lot better positionally, and he switches off a lot less. Though he was still at fault for standing off Raspadori for Italy's winner last week. It is one of those where I'm not delighted about it, but I also think that it is probably the least bad option. And when he's on it, which he usually is, Walker is absolutely horrible to play against. I would drop Harry Maguire at this stage, for his own sake if nothing else, because whilst he was brilliant for England at Euro 2020 and at the previous World Cup, and is actually more than capable, I think, of enjoying a similarly impressive tournament in Qatar, he is also capable, I suspect, of self-destructing, and the pressure on him right now must be overwhelming. I don't think that Gareth Southgate will drop him, but I would, and I'd probably start Eric Dyer in the middle of the 5, given that he has looked solid for Tottenham there under Antonio Conte. He has got plenty of England and indeed tournament experience, having just broken back into the England setup after a couple of years out. And that central role that he plays for Spurs is well suited to him, given that he previously played in midfield, allowing him to sweep up and step out of defence at times, bolstering England's numbers in midfield. Stones is the only centre-back whose inclusion isn't up for too much debate, I don't think. And then I would pick Ben Chilwell narrowly ahead of Luke Shaw, even though neither of them fill me with confidence. Chilwell has great stamina, and he does make some really intelligent and threatening runs down the left flank. Meanwhile, Shaw was great at the Euros and scored against Germany, hence why I do think he will start, but I think the balance of the team, as an all-round unit, would be a bit better with Chilwell in there, albeit there isn't much in it. I haven't even mentioned Trent Alexander-Arnold yet, which is bizarre, or Kieran Trippier for that matter, and that is because I don't think that either of them will start, and I can actually sympathise with that decision. It will either be James or Walker on the right, of either a 4 or most likely a 5, though all 4 of England's immensely talented right-backs will almost certainly make the squad. There is even a small chance, if Shaw and Chilwell play very little football for their clubs between now and the start of the World Cup, that Southgate will look to shoehorn either James or Trippier into that right-back or right wing-back role as he did at Euro 2020, and also just as he did with Saka against Italy, though I suspect that one is probably dead following that particular failed experiment. Midfield: Jude Bellingham and Declan Rice. If England play a two-man midfield at the World Cup, as seems extremely probable, it has to be these two. Rice has been one of the first names on the team sheet for the last couple of years, whether he has been partnered by Henderson, Phillips or Bellingham, and Bellingham is without doubt one of the best young players on the planet. As good as Bellingham is, and he really is outstanding, I don't think that Gareth Southgate gets much credit for the way in which he has integrated him into the England squad. At the age of 19, Bellingham has already won 17 caps for England, and he looks set to start at the World Cup. That is a brave decision by a manager who is often accused of being too cautious, but it is also the right decision, and it's good to see him place that trust in him. Although Rice and Bellingham are both very good, and have a combined market value that is probably in excess of £250 million, England are always going to be light in midfield, and in danger of being overrun in there when they've only got 2 men in midfield. Rice and Bellingham will need support from their wing-backs, and preferably from one of the centre-backs stepping out into midfield at times. One thing that England do still lack is a really classy, creative, deep-line playmaker to dictate the tempo of a game, calm things down at times, and stretch the pitch. Declan Rice can do some of those things, as can Jordan Henderson and James Ward-Prowse, but not in the same way that almost every other national team, at least of England's calibre, has someone who can really pull the strings in midfield. That isn't Gareth Southgate's fault, of course, that is just the reality of the pool of players available to him. If England do play a back 4, and therefore most likely a 4-3-3, or just somehow manage to find room for 3 midfielders, I would be enormously surprised if the player who joined Jude Bellingham and Declan Rice in there wasn't Mason Mount, who we will come back round to later on. Attack: Bukayo Saka, Harry Kane, and Raheem Sterling. I think there is a bit of a consensus developing, which includes Gareth Southgate, that this will be England's front 3 when the World Cup begins. I'm not saying that is set in stone. There is a lot of football to be played between now and then, and injuries could still play a part, but that is just the sense that I get. Kane and Sterling, I think, are non-negotiables. Both are massive for England, and are our main goal threats. Kane is England's best and most important player, and one of the best players in the world. I'm not sure that there is much else that I need to add to that, but he is England's captain now, he could well become England's all-time record goal scorer at this World Cup, and he is a dream tournament player due to his relentless self-belief, persistent knack of scoring goals, and his ability to block out all of the noise that surrounds a tournament and keep playing his own game. Sterling will always have his critics for a variety of reasons, but he was England's star man and arguably the player of the tournament at Euro 2020. He has a tremendous work rate, his movement and intelligence are virtually without peer, at least in the England squad. He scores and creates goals for fun, and he is now extremely experienced, even though he is only 27 years old, having won 79 caps for England, and Qatar will be his 5th major tournament for the Three Lions. No one in this current England squad has won more caps than Sterling, and now Chelsea star man, I would be amazed if he didn't start that opening game against Iran. And that leaves Bukayo Saka. Clearly, going into those 2 Nations League fixtures, Gareth Southgate wanted to start Phil Foden out wide on the right, and I have been saying for years now that Foden has to start for England, and that we could even build a team around him. The reality is that he is yet to really flourish in an England shirt though, and I don't think that he has been at his absolute best for Manchester City so far this season. He still has to be heavily involved, and what an incredible asset to be able to bring off the bench. But it was Bukayo Saka who dislodged Foden mid-tournament at Euro 2020 and proceeded to keep him out of the team all the way through to the final, and his impressive cameo against Germany when he played in his own position, I suspect might just have swayed Southgate towards starting him at the World Cup. Clearly, if Foden bags a trio of hat-tricks between now and that Iran fixture, and Saka has a couple of niggling injuries or struggles to make much of an impact at Arsenal, that is likely to change. But Saka gives England great energy, industry, and ingenuity off the right flank, and Southgate has made no secret of the fact that he likes him a lot. His pace is also a really useful asset for England on the counter-attack, which may well be how they plan to approach games in the knockout stage against top-class opposition, assuming that they get out of the groups, of course. Harry Kane isn't the quickest, but his vision and passing are both superb, and just as Antonio Conte has done at Tottenham, Gareth Southgate has always sought to start 2 really quick wide players either side of him. That is why Phil Foden and Jack Grealish have at times been overlooked, not that they are slow, just not as quick nor as direct as some of the alternatives. And it's also why I wouldn't rule out Marcus Rashford returning to play a big part at the World Cup. Whilst it seems unlikely that he will start against Iran, having missed both of England's warm-up games through injury, and having been dropped last season during a really tough 2021-22 campaign, Rashford has 5 goal contributions in only 6 games already for Manchester United this season, and he looks ruthless under Erik ten Hag when the Red Devils break at speed. Whilst the goalkeepers, defence and midfield are probably quite settled, at least in terms of who Gareth Southgate expects to be in his final squad of 26 for the World Cup, if not necessarily who he is going to start, I still think that a lot could change in terms of the forwards over the next month or 2 months, in terms of their club form. Raheem Sterling, Bukayo Saka, Harry Kane and Phil Foden will all make the squad, without doubt, unless they get injured. But the likes of Jadon Sancho, Marcus Rashford and Ollie Watkins will all be competing with Jared Bowen, even Tony, and perhaps even Jack Grealish and Tammy Abraham for a spot in the England squad. Given his start to the season and lack of international experience, I think that Bowen will probably be first in line for the axe if he doesn't enjoy a really good October and early November in the Premier League, and I would be surprised if Rashford didn't come in, but the rest are far trickier to call. The England team looks stronger, in my view, and on paper at least, in a 4-3-3 or 4-2-3-1 formation, and if I wanted to be popular, which clearly I don't, I would have picked a team like this with Pickford in goal, either James or Trent at right back, Stones and Tomori at centre back, Shaw at left back, Rice and Bellingham still in midfield, but joined by Phil Foden or even James Maddison in a more advanced role, and probably the same front three of Sterling, Kane and Saka, because I suspect that 11 would appease the largest number of people. That is a really good team, on paper again, but whenever Southgate has experimented with anything like that, England have looked a lot less cohesive and overexposed. And ultimately, his job is not to appease people, but to win football matches, particularly at major tournaments. If he wins the World Cup by drawing every knockout game 0-0 before winning on penalties with Eric Dyer being played as a target man, he will be adored, for the next few months at least. If he plays beautiful, free-flowing passing football a la Brazil at the 1982 World Cup, but England are eliminated in the second round just like Brazil were in 1982, he'll most likely get the sack and everyone will call him an idiot. I have disagreed with plenty of Gareth Southgate's decisions. I think Fikayo Tomori ought to have been more involved. I thought that Ben White probably should have been included in the most recent squad, and I think that he should have made more of an effort to experiment with a bolder lineup or strategy at least, and a back four to see if England could make it work. Even then, I acknowledge that the last of those three would have been really difficult, given how few games England have had to prepare for this World Cup, and the number of key players they were without for the games against Hungary, Italy and Germany back in June, just to give one example. But if the England squad were to be picked by football Twitter, there would be wholesale changes to the squad every time it was announced, and about 8 players would be dropped every single time we lose a game. Jack Grealish, for example, was the flavour of the month right the way through the Euros, with persistent calls for him to start games and critiques of Southgate for failing to accommodate him. Even when Grealish was introduced off the bench to play a pivotal role within a game, that was just seen as evidence that he ought to have started rather than Southgate managing a game well and having used his substitutes to great effect. Now Grealish has fallen out of favour since signing for Manchester City, and the likes of James Maddison have inherited that mantle, with Southgate getting battered for not including him in his squad ahead of someone like Mason Mount, who seems to be perennially unpopular with England fans, despite routinely getting picked by every manager he has ever had. It seems that, in football, the less that you play and the longer that you don't play for, the better you become at the sport. I've already said that I think Tomori is England's second best centre-back and should have won more than 3 caps. But you would think that he was the love child of Jaap Stam and Franco Baresi based upon some of the discourse surrounding him being left out. The amount of vitriol that is aimed at Harry Maguire, who made the Euro 2020 team the tournament for England and became a cult hero at the 2018 World Cup, is bordering on deranged. A couple of tweets that popped up on my timeline on Monday evening included this one by Jeff Stelling, which reads, "OMG, losing at home so Foden and Sterling go off, WTF." England, of course, went on to take a 3-2 lead following those substitutions, and only failed to win the game because of an error by Nick Pope, prompting this rapid backtrack, and also this one from 37-year-old Harrogate Town centre-back Leon Legg, who tweeted, "Ivan Toney, go play for Jamaica, mate, cause Gareth ain't gonna give you your chance." This was Ivan Toney's first call-up for the England squad, may I remind you. He is 26 years old, he never played for England at any youth level, he was playing in the Championship as recently as 2021, and League One as recently as 2020. He has made a sensational start to the current campaign at Brentford, hence his inclusion in the England squad, but the man keeping him out of the team is one of the best centre-forwards on the planet and is the England captain. Tammy Abraham scored 27 goals last season and reached a European final at Roma, but still could barely get a look in. When Gareth Southgate first got the England job, he was accused of handing out caps willy-nilly to any Englishman who merely got games in the Premier League. That was because England weren't very good at the time. Now he has got some half-decent players, and he's getting flack for not dislodging established internationals who have performed brilliantly for England in favour of what's hot that specific international break. I digress. This isn't a video about Southgate. I made one of those just a few months ago following the last international break, which you are welcome to go and watch after this one, if that is something that you might be interested in. Anyway, I could talk for days about England, as could most of you I suspect, and if I were to make one last observation it would be that Mason Mount is well worth keeping an eye on, because if there is any way for Gareth Southgate to get him into his team, either in midfield or on the wing, I think that he will be very tempted, but I shall leave it at that. Thank you all as ever for watching today's video. Hit the like button if you enjoyed it, let me know your thoughts and your England best 11 down below in the comments, and make sure that you are subscribed and have notifications turned on for HITC Sevens. Apologies, by the way, for the extra day without a video yesterday. That was, I had a weekend off. My apologies. As I say, yeah, like, share, subscribe, all that nonsense. And also, you can find me on Twitter or on Instagram via the username at HITC Sevens on both, should you wish to do so.